Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. Welcome to this fifth in a series of webinars, which is organized by the CBD, along with the Group of Earth Observations Network, GEOBON, the UN Statistical Division, and the UN Environment Programme World Conservation Monitoring Center. This webinar aims to provide information to support implementation of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and in particular, the sorts of tools that will be available to support implementation. I'd just like to introduce myself. I'm Andy Stott. I'm a member of the UK delegation participating in the preparatory meetings leading up to COP15, and I've been invited to chair the session today. I'd just like to cover some of the housekeeping rules before we begin. We are recording today's session and it's being made available on YouTube. And your microphone will be muted and your camera will be turned off during the webinar. But we do encourage you to comment or ask questions. Please use the chat function throughout the session. And please, if you've got a question, please be clear about which of the speakers it's addressing or which of the platforms it's addressing. And then we will try to pick up some immediate questions after each presentation, and then we've got 20 minutes allocated to pick up other questions towards the end of the sessions. And if you've got any technical issues, please put those in the chat as well. I'd now like to start, and first of all, we'll start with a short video with opening remarks from Elizabeth Mrema, the Executive Secretary of the CBD. Please, could we have the short video, please?
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to address you today. My colleagues at the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity and I, in collaboration with the Group on Earth Observation Biodiversity Observation Network, the United Nations Statistics Division, and the United Nations Environment Programme World Conservation Monitoring Center, and the UN Regional Commissions have been organizing a series of webinars to increase understanding of the monitoring framework of the Global Biodiversity Framework post-2020 and to foster collaboration among stakeholders. I would like to extend my sincere appreciations to everyone involved in preparing and organizing these webinars. As has been expressed by many countries, organizations throughout the process of developing the post-2020 framework, effective monitoring will be crucial to its success and in ensuring that we will collectively achieve the goals and targets in both the framework as well as the 2050 vision for biodiversity. Indeed, one of the conclusions of the Convention's two previous strategic plans is that progress has been impaired by our limited inability to effectively monitor the implementation in a timely manner at both national and global level. This lack of monitoring information has in turn limited the extent to which biodiversity information can inform planning, reporting, reviewing, and decision-making. Effectively monitoring progress, both nationally and globally, in the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework will not be an easy task. The current draft of the framework addresses a range of issues spanning from conservation, sustainable use, access and benefit sharing, to resource mobilization and other means of implementation, traditional knowledge, and engagement. We will need to find ways to effectively monitor all aspects of the framework. While this task will be challenging, I'm confident that together we can rise to this challenge. There is already a wealth and knowledge, expertise, resources, and tools on which we can draw and further build upon. The discussions we are having here today and others like it are key in helping to bring these different avenues together. Ladies and gentlemen, our path to phase 2 of the 15th Conference of the Parties incoming and the adoption of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework continues to evolve. As we enter the final stages of our journey, let us continue to be ambitious, learn from the past challenges, and ensure that we make the best use of the different tools and platforms that already exist to monitor the implementation of the framework and further build on this. I hope you will all enjoy today's webinar. I would like to thank again UNEP-WCMC for organizing this session. Additionally, as always, my team at the Secretariat and I stand ready to support you on our collective journey to the Conference of the Parties 15 and in our combined efforts to implement its outcomes, monitor progress, and enhance actions. Thank you.
And thank you very much to Elizabeth for those opening remarks, which have set the scene for this meeting very well. I'd now like to pass on to Gillian Campbell from the Secretariat to give us some more context for the discussions today. Over to you, Gillian.
Thank you very much.
And sorry, Gillian, lovely to see you again.
Nice to see you too. I'm really going to just sort of talk about what the stage in the process is in terms of the monitoring framework for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And this is not really what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today in the session, in this webinar, is once we have a monitoring framework, what tools exist that are going to help parties to actually monitor. And so most of what I'm saying now, regardless of which indicators are agreed and how the negotiations on the indicators go, there is definitely going to be a need for countries to receive support in terms of monitoring and to understand what tools are available to help them better monitor in order to make better national decisions and also for reporting to the convention. And so I just wanted to say, this webinar it's related, but also it serves its own purpose regardless of how the negotiations go on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework Monitoring Framework. Next slide. So I'm not going to take up much of your time, but I just wanted to say that for anyone who doesn't know, the current Global Biodiversity Framework logic is a bit of a shift from the IACHI framework, which was the 2010 to 2020 targets. So the IACHI targets was a set of 20 targets that related more to action, whereas in the current Global Biodiversity Framework, there's also 4 goals that aim to capture a high-level vision to 2050. And these include things like the actual outcomes that you're wanting in terms of biodiversity, ensuring that ecosystems are growing or maintained, ensuring that species are actually healthy and have stable populations, and ensuring the integrity and connectivity of ecosystems. These sorts of things are at the goal level. And then there's still actions similar to the IACHI, which tell you sort of how you want to get there. Next slide. I should mention the targets are to 2030. So for both of the goals and the targets, currently the proposal is to have a set of indicators that help to measure these goals and targets. And there's 3 different levels of indicators that are being proposed in the monitoring framework proposal. The first is headline indicators, and these are a high-level set of indicators, trying to keep it at a smaller number for really just measuring the messages and the key messages and the goals and the targets. And these are the ones that are really the ones I think that are getting the most attention in terms of negotiations, because these indicators are also being proposed as a component of the national reporting process. And so these headline indicators would really be used not only to measure global progress and to aggregate up to this global level to have some global analysis, but they would be used by countries in their planning cycle and their reporting cycle, and really hopefully be something that countries find useful for informing national biodiversity policy. And then there's two other levels of indicators. The component indicators are similar to the headline indicators in that they are also being proposed for nationalization. However, they're more specific. It's a longer list. And so it's more of a headline plus for providing advice where there is a need to drill into more detail in particular context. And then there's a set of complementary indicators, which is a long list of indicators that aims to provide information across the wide spectrum of issues that are included in the global biodiversity framework. And some of these may be relevant in some countries and some may not. So it's more of a menu of indicators to have a look at in terms of conducting different types of analysis. Next slide. So before I say this, I will say in this session today, we're sort of looking at different tools across these different types of indicators that I just mentioned, so that, again, the partners that we're working with, like WCMC, are exploring ways to have a robust way that we can actually operationalize this monitoring framework so that we can provide global and national analytical tools. And it is expected that this monitoring framework will be agreed at the COP. It might be agreed with some, maybe some parts of it, like the complementary indicators stay as a running list. Things like that are up in the air at the current time, but there is the expectation that some of the monitoring framework, hopefully the headline indicators, would be adopted as part of the global biodiversity framework. Even indicators where there is still a need for some development that could be recognized in such a decision. And the proposed monitoring framework has already gone through some discussions. It was primarily discussed at SAPSTA 24, and it will be continued to be discussed at SAPSTA 24, which is being resumed in January. And the SAPSTA provided quite a lot of feedback on the indicators. There was a survey on the indicators that was conducted, which led to a next iteration of the monitoring framework. And in general, SAPSTA agrees to sort of continue the work on this monitoring framework and even establish an expert group that will guide it after COP15. This is things that had quite wide support at the SAPSTA. And as I said, the monitoring will be further discussed in January by both the SAPSTA and the Open and Working Group. So hopefully that puts us in a good position for the COP15. Next slide. So I really don't have anything else to say. I just wanted to say that, as I mentioned before, sort of regardless of that discussion, regardless of how the monitoring framework turns out, the tools being presented, I think, today provide a basis that's going to be useful for supporting countries in terms of monitoring biodiversity and in terms of supporting global analysis. Thank you, and back to you, Andy.
Thank you very much, Gillian, for setting that context. And certainly we have some very interesting proposals that have been discussed at SAPSTA and the open-ended working group. And it's clear that the sorts of tools that we're going to be looking at today will be very important for those processes, both at the national and at the global level. So I'd like to now move on to our first presentation, which is Lorraine Weatherden from UNEP-WCMC, who'll be talking about the UN Biodiversity Lab. So over to you, Lorraine.
Thank you very much, Andy. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Lauren Weatherden, and I'm a Senior Program Officer at the United Nations Environment Programme World Conservation Monitoring Centre here in Cambridge. And I have the pleasure of sharing with you a UN Biodiversity Lab on behalf of our partners today. Next slide, please. So let's start with the basics. What is UN Biodiversity Lab? The UN Biodiversity Lab is a free open source platform that provides policymakers with access to the best spatial data and analytical tools, regardless of their GIS experience. Next slide, please. We created UN Biodiversity Lab just over 3 years ago, specifically to support parties with their commitments to the CBD, with a focus on the 6 national reports. With the initial launch of the platform, we challenged countries to double the number of their maps between their 5th national reports and their 6th national reports, and they succeeded. And then following the completion of the 6th national report, we fully re-envisioned UN Biodiversity Lab based on feedback from users to provide a wide range of functionalities to support planning, implementation, and monitoring of the emerging post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Next slide, please. Just last month, we launched the updated version of UN Biodiversity Lab, which we're very excited to share with you today. Next slide, please. And so with the help of my colleagues, let's dive in. I'm going to show a trailer here introducing UN Biodiversity Lab. Over to you.
From the streets of New York City to the heart of the Amazon, maps help us understand how our changing planet is affecting our lives. Maps help us see where nature is thriving and where it is being destroyed. Spatial data help decision makers put nature at the heart of sustainable development by helping them identify essential ecosystems that help us secure water, feed more than 7 billion people, avoid natural disasters, keep carbon in the ground, and sustain more than 2 billion livelihoods. We, at the United Nations, together with our partners, are excited to launch the next iteration of the UN Biodiversity Lab. We have updated the UN Biodiversity Lab with new data and new functions to help decision makers put nature at the heart of development. To access more than 400 cutting-edge global data sets, including the world's first 10-meter resolution land cover and land use map. To explore popular data collections that unlock the power of data on key thematic issues and that provide insights on how and where action is needed most. To create a secure workspace where you can upload your own data to generate your own insights on the intersection of nature, climate, and sustainable development. To calculate dynamic indicators such as deforestation, showing the state of the planet at the click of a button. To generate your own powerful maps that can guide local and national action for nature, climate, and sustainable development. Powered by Microsoft's Planetary Computer and supported by more than 30 data providers, the UN Biodiversity Lab provides novel insight that is essential for putting nature at the heart of sustainable development. Our goal is to enable everyone to harness the power of data, to equip policymakers with powerful tools to make more informed decisions on nature, and to be able to monitor the pulse of our planet. Join us. Start exploring today at unbiodiversitylab.org.
Perfect. Next slide, please. So our trailer provided you with a glimpse of the functionalities available through UN Biodiversity Lab. And I'd like to take the rest of this time to provide a bit more detail regarding what has changed in the latest version. So overall, what's new? At the center of our redesign was making UN Biodiversity Lab more user-friendly and intuitive so that anyone can easily use the platform. And to do this, we improved the design and made the platform fully available in 5 languages. We also recognize that being able to share data across platforms, including some of those that we've mentioned today, will be essential as we move forward. And to do this, we've built UNBL to be able to share and receive data from other platforms via an API. Next slide, please. In our redesign, we also sought to enhance functionalities that were at the center of our offering and to provide new functionalities based on some of the feedback we'd received. You can see the full list of updated and new features on this slide, many of which were mentioned in the trailer. And while we don't have time necessarily to go through this in detail today, we would welcome a discussion around this afterwards and any questions that you may have in the Q&A. Next slide, please. And this is just a quick visualization of those 6 key features. Next slide, please. So I've thrown a lot at you, and we're wondering if we could take the opportunity to ask for your feedback in terms of what features are most relevant to you. And so hopefully with the help of my colleagues here, we'd love to start a Zoom poll. And you should see a box popping up on your screen shortly. And you can select more than one option. The options are access global data layers, customized collections, viewing dynamic metrics from your country of interest, creating the secure private workspaces we discussed, which we realize this is often an area of interest for many of those that we've spoken with. You can create maps, and there are also other features such as mapping essential life support areas. So again, please feel free to fill that out now. I'll give a bit of time for your input. And these hearing from you has always been incredibly helpful for us in terms of prioritizing the next steps and what we should work on moving forward. So please do feel free to reach out afterwards as well. And maybe just another 5 seconds before we see the results. Brilliant. I think if we can close the poll there. Fantastic. This is wonderful. Thank you very much. It's great to see that there's a lot of interest, of course, in the global data layers and the customized collections and in the dynamic metrics. Like I said, a lot of these are features that we would like to continue to strengthen over time. So I won't take too much longer, but please do feel free to reach out afterwards. And next slide, please. Now, just before I wrap up, I wanted to leave you with 3 easy ways that you can get in touch with us today. Firstly, that we have a mailing list, so please drop your email in the chat, and we can add you right away or follow up with us afterwards. There's also, you can sign up for an account to access your preferred features. And finally, there's an email here, my colleague Annie Vernig, but also please, we can share details afterwards. Please feel free to contact us to help you set up a UNBL workspace if of interest. So. Next slide, please. And with that, I will hand it over to Andy and to thank you very much once again for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you very much, Lauren. That was a very interesting, very concise presentation with a lot of a very good overview, and I'm sure that people will probably want to follow up on your invitation to sort of find out some more information on that. I think in the chat we've had a comment as to whether it's going to be available in Arabic. Would you be able to answer that question, Lauren?
I believe, and I will double check now, but I believe it's available in Arabic in all 6 UN languages, I believe. One moment here. Oh, no, it isn't yet. No, but we will certainly add that to our list. Thank you very much for flagging that.
Okay, thank you. I don't think there are any more immediate questions coming through on that. So thank you very much for that. And Lauren, and I'd now like to move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Sarah Ivory from UNEP-WCMC, and Sarah's going to talk to us about the target tracker approach. So over to you, Sarah.
Andy, and hi everybody. So as Andy said, my name's Sarah Ivory. I'm a Senior Programme Officer at UNEP-WCMC, where I've supported global and national indicator development and use for a little over 9 years now. Today I'm going to talk to you about an approach for tracking progress towards the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Next slide, please. So as a proof of concept for an approach for tracking progress towards the global targets, we are going to develop a web-based tool which will aim primarily to promote transparency and improve the communication of progress towards the global goals and targets of the Post-2020 framework. This tool will be based on the monitoring framework for the Post-2020 framework, whatever form that takes once it's agreed. We're very aware this is still under discussion at the moment, so we are going to be following these very closely over the coming months to understand the role a target tracker could or should play, and how it could visualize indicators and show progress. It's very much a user-centered design, and as well as following these discussions, we're also going to be consulting with users throughout its design and development. And we're lucky enough to have funding from the European Commission and further support from the Swedish Postcode Foundation to enable us to develop this proof of concept. Next slide, please. So the target tracker tool has a wide range of expected users with very different ideas and needs. Above all, it's intended to support parties to the CBD and other multilateral environmental agreements. Other users also include secretariats of the CBD and other MEAs, those involved in other processes such as the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES, and the Sustainable Development Goals, and also regional organisations and NGOs and academia as well. And we're trying to ensure this really is user-driven by getting as much input and feedback as is possible during this process from all these different user groups who may want to understand where progress is being made, where the global community is failing to make progress, and also, quite importantly, they might to understand where there are knowledge gaps and we actually can't assess progress yet. And next slide, please. We previously conducted some user research in 2019, but of course, back then we didn't know what the post-2020 framework might look like. So now that we have a draft of the Global Biodiversity Framework and the associated monitoring framework, we've updated the designs and have got a lot more input through a round of user consultations that we've held just this month with groups of different user types. There'll be ongoing outreach to users as well as we develop a design-based prototype for COP15. And then COP itself, of course, will be a great opportunity to get feedback on this. And the ultimate design and functionalities of a target tracker tool will be determined based on the outcomes of COP15 and the decisions taken by parties on modalities and mechanisms for enhancing transparency. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to take a chance to share some of the ideas that we've heard from the user panel meetings that we've held over the last month. And these have provided an opportunity for users to really think about what they would want from an online target tracker tool. These reflections are very much preliminary suggestions. They don't necessarily reflect what's going to be technically and technologically possible to achieve. And a lot of this will also depend on what the eventual monitoring framework looks like. And as well, users' needs will continue to be determined through the negotiations relating to enhanced transparency around the implementation of the post-2020 framework. So one thing we've heard from users is quite clearly is that they would like the target tracker to provide regular summaries of progress, global progress to support CBD discussions. We've heard that a target tracker would ideally allow comparisons. So you can compare change year on year, as well as comparing from one country to another, and also to help place a country within its regional context. Transparency of global data is very important to users, and so it's very clear that a target tracker needs to show the data source, the owner, the methodology, and so on. We've heard from a lot of users that they would like a target tracker to show both national and global perspectives, and preferably that a target tracker would actually aggregate national progress to a global level. Now, as with the user groups, we've talked a lot about using global data and particularly about disaggregating it to show national progress. And on the whole, users felt that this disaggregated global data is extremely useful, and especially when no national data exists on a particular subject or for a specific indicator, but it needs to also be recognised that it's not always optimal and it's not always entirely reflective of the national situation for all indicators. So countries in some cases may prefer to use their own national data where this is possible. We heard very clearly from users that a target tracker should not be too reliant on high bandwidth and needs to allow users with low bandwidth to access and use it fully. And of course, it should show progress, and it needs to show how far we are from the target, but it also has a really valuable role to play in highlighting knowledge gaps. We can't measure everything yet. We don't have indicators on every subject available. And so by highlighting these gaps, it can help spur further research and innovation. So as you can hear from these suggestions, one of the big challenges that we are going to face is integrating different data sources and indicators at different scales for the same targets to try and tell a useful story of progress. And there are also real technical and technological challenges of aggregation that we may face for a lot of indicators. And we do, of course, also recognise that that there are very different viewpoints in the negotiations on the use of global data, and that in the future, greater emphasis may be placed on national data as national monitoring systems are further developed. So we're going to be following all of this very closely to understand how a target tracker tool is best placed to support this. And of course, all the while getting feedback from users. Next slide, please. So that's everything that I wanted to cover today. And we really are just getting started with this, but it's clear from the meetings that we've been having this month and other interests that there's a lot of enthusiasm for having a tool that can show us in as clear and up-to-date way as is possible how the global community is doing in implementing the Post-2020 framework. So we're really looking forward to progressing this in a way that's as useful for parties and other users as possible. So if anyone listening wants to know more or be involved in future user research, please do feel free to contact me directly on my email address, which I believe is on the screen. That's it. Thanks for listening, and back to you, Andy.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. I think that is indeed a very ambitious proposal, but one that we should, would welcome to understand how that can help parties and help the CBD in this very challenging use of data, both from global and national levels. I think we've got a couple of questions here, which I think you've partly answered. Will the target tracker show national progress towards the agreed global targets, or just global progress? That's the first one. And second one is, where we have national data relevant to global indicators, can we upload it, or will we be able to upload it to the target tracker, as it will be more accurate than the global data for our country?
Well, thanks.
You can answer those, Sarah.
Yeah, I think I touched on this in my presentation. So nothing is set in stone regarding the tool. Yet we are of course limited by what is technically and technologically possible and by the resources that we have. But it's also that there's very clear interest from parties and other users to be able to see national progress. Exactly how that works will depend on the ultimate monitoring framework. And as I also mentioned, some of these challenges in integrating data of different scales and different sources. So over the next few months, we're going to be following all this extremely closely and having a lot of discussions with users, data providers and others as to what might be possible and how it could work. In terms of the ability to upload the data, it's something that has been mentioned by some of the potential users as being of interest. Again, it's an additional functionality, and we need to understand how that would work and how that data would then be integrated within the global tracker. So it's something that we're looking into. Nothing, as I say, everything is on the table at the moment, and we're and as the negotiations move forwards in the run up to COP, these will all get much clearer as to how the target tracker should best support users' needs.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sarah. We do have a couple of more questions, but I think we'll move on to the next presentation now and pick up those questions in the wrap-up Q&A discussion. So thank you, Sarah, and thank you for those questions. So I'd now like to move on to our next presentation and welcome Mike Gill from NatureServe to talk to us about national and regional biodiversity dashboards.
Great. Thank you, Andy, and thanks to the organizers of the webinar. My name is Mike Gill. I'm the director of NatureServe's Biodiversity Indicator Program. And NatureServe's working at the national and regional scale. So we're working with national and regional partners around the world to customize and build repeatable biodiversity dashboards. And the following presentation just provides a brief overview of some of these dashboards. And our focus is really on blending national, regional, and global data and indicators. Next slide, please. So what's our niche? Next bullet, please. Our focus is working with national regional partners to strengthen their capacity to streamline biodiversity assessments at that scale, target tracking, as well as conservation planning, focused mostly on using their own data. Next slide, please, or next bullet. Our dashboard users include national agencies and regional organizations such as the Arctic Council, who conduct biodiversity assessments, CBD target tracking, as well as conservation planning. Next bullet, please. We focus primarily, as mentioned, on national and regional data holdings, and we augment where relevant with global data. And the way we do that is we use established data standards and we create with our partners at those scales repeatable workflows to structure that data to indicator process. Next bullet, please. And the key functionalities of our dashboards really are focusing on the ability to scale data and indicators from regional to national to watershed scales, as well as overlay data to support assessments and planning. So we put the metadata at the user's fingertips and we provide customizable country profiles with a focus on allowing policymakers to track key metrics for their country and compare with others. Next bullet, please. And finally, we see our new line of dashboards as extensions to existing and forming national and regional biodiversity observation networks of GeoBond. So we see them as really extensions to that data production cycle that's happening at that scale. And our dashboards are built using Esri's ArcGIS Online. And the focus there is to streamline production and scalability. And finally, we take a user-driven design approach. So we work first at defining what are the key needs and uses of these dashboards and build them directly to serve those needs. Next slide, please. So our new line of dashboards started with a collaboration in Southeast Asia. If you could click on that, please. And this is with the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity. Next click, please. We're also working with partners in the Tropical Andes to build a dashboard based on the Tropical Andes Observatory. Next click, please. And we're also working with the Arctic Council to build an Arctic biodiversity dashboard that brings to life their data holdings. And next click, please. And finally, we're working right now with the Bahamas to build a dashboard to support improved marine protected area management. And we're also in discussions with Esri and the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data to build a suite of national indicator reporting toolkits with a focus in part to streamline national reporting, but also biodiversity assessments at that scale. And these toolkits will include user design processes, indicator reporting frameworks, workflows, and template dashboards, and more. So let's take a look at some of our dashboards. Next slide, please. So looking at the ASEAN dashboard, just an example here of how our biodiversity dashboards allow a user to explore spatial relationships, such as the extent to which threatened species occurrences are found within ASEAN heritage parks or across intact forest landscapes and other spatial layers. Next slide, please. They also visualize and explore time series trends at multiple scales using best-in-class indicators from global partners, such as seen here from Australia's CSIRO, their Bioclimatic Ecosystem Resilience Index. And this indicator can be visualized at both national and watershed scales. Next slide, please. And we also build national profiles that are customizable, and these provide a snapshot of key metrics concerning biodiversity and conservation actions. These profiles will form the basis for creating those customizable templates that I mentioned to streamline biodiversity assessment, conservation planning, and national target tracking. Next slide, please. And moving to the Arctic, we're building a dashboard that draws from the Arctic's own data holdings and blending that with regional and even global data layers and indicators to serve and strengthen their assessment process, as well as being able to track key metrics, seabirds, caribou, and so forth. Next slide. And finally, just a quick look at one aspect of our Tropical Andes dashboard, where countries in the region can compare their own trends against their neighbors and peers using customizable dashboards. So given the growing calls for increased national capacity that Gillian mentioned at the beginning, in terms of implementation in the new global biodiversity framework, NatureServe's working sort of from a bottom-up national scale approach to build that capacity to strengthen indicator reporting. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mike, for that rapid tour of NatureServe's work there. Some fascinating work there, and also some clear sort of relationships with some of the other platforms that we've seen, which would be interesting to explore. I think I've got one question coming up for you, Mike, which is, are there any plans to use the dashboard in Africa?
Yeah, thanks for that, Andy, and thanks for the question. Yes, the short answer is yes. So this partnership that we're in discussions with Esri and the Global Partnership of Sustainable Development Data is to start with 5 new national pilots. And we'd like to select those 5 pilots in a combination of Africa and the Latin America Caribbean region. We have some discussions with a couple of countries right now in Africa about that, although it's probably too early to say which those are, but the short answer is yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. And let me just have another quick check. I don't think we at the moment have anything more specific. It's one further question, Mike, just coming. Given the growing calls for an enhanced capacity at the national scale to track and report progress, how can your national and regional dashboards and your planned national recording toolkits help? So how will they help in national capacity building? Thank you, Mike.
So I guess what's perhaps the challenge here, and we hear this with the target tracker design, is not just being able to track global progress, but also national progress using national data. And to some extent, we can do that. And I think there's lots of platforms out there that do a great job of this, of being able to upload data, especially spatial data. The challenge is that the myriad of indicators that are coming out really demands the need for that bottom-up process as well. So it's not just top-down. And so our big focus is on how to use existing data standards and workflows that build on national data and integrate that with global data. If we can do this in an effective way, we should be able to scale that up, somewhat akin to how SDG reporting and FAO reporting is done, where you're using standard data reporting methods to produce that. So our big focus right now is just really working at the national scale and really trying to strengthen those national data production and data holdings.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that, Mike. There may be other questions come in which we can pick up in the discussion session. So thank you very much, Mike. And I'd now like to go on to our next speaker, and Natasha Ali from UNEP-WCMC, who's going to talk to us about other platforms, including Dart, and how the platforms relate. to each other. So over to you, Natasha.
Thanks, Andy. Hello, everyone. In this section of the webinar, I think it's probably a good time to sort of acknowledge the fact that we're talking about a few of the available online platforms and tools and websites that are available or in development to support the implementation of the post-2020 framework. And we acknowledge that there's an ever-growing landscape of tools. And in this section, I think, and it's worth noting for the entire series of webinars, that the products that we're presenting here are not a fully comprehensive list of all platforms that are available to support the post-2020 framework. And we recognise as well that there are numerous flows of data and information that can inform these platforms, including national data from governments and also from non-state actors. However, what we're trying to do in this session is to present some of the tools that are available and to think about how they might be used in the monitoring framework for the post-2020 framework, and how they might relate to each other and how they might support existing national, regional and global processes. We're not, for example, presenting tools by many of our partners. For example, our partners in delivery of this webinar series, GEOBON and UNSD, have asked us to highlight the fact that we aren't able to present all of the tools that are available for use. GEOBON are revamping two of their platforms, the EBV data portal and the BON in a box. And when those tools are available, we'll be presenting all of those once the work is completed. But we do want to think about how the tools that we're presenting here might be used to complement and support these national efforts at the different stages of planning, monitoring, reporting, of implementation. And some of the tools that we've presented and heard about so far are already part of these processes, and others are emerging to fill gaps. And so we need to think about how those that are emerging might be better used and to maximise their value. And the platforms, of course, are designed in mind to think about national and regional capacity building efforts and to support countries. And I think one of the challenges that we've identified as we're working through these platforms is how we best identify and connect the data that is used for national reporting on these platforms and the indicators that are used, and how we can more efficiently support the action on an implementation of the post-2020 framework. Next slide, please. With that, I'll just highlight one of the, the next slide, please. With that, I think I'll just highlight one of the tools that we haven't covered in any detail here very briefly, but also note that we're planning another set of webinars about specifically the DART, the data and reporting tool. And when those webinars are prepared, then we'll advertise those to everyone on this group. The DART tool provides a fully functional and secure national working space for parties, and it was developed in order to address some of the challenges in national reporting. And the aim of the DART is to enable people to organise and share and maintain documents to help with biodiversity reporting. And it's worth noting that it's not an additional reporting obligation. The DART is designed to be helpful and a tool to assist with knowledge management at the national level. Next slide, please. So the developers of the DART have identified three main users and beneficiaries. And as outlined on this slide here, they've identified national reporters who can use the tool to organise and use biodiversity information for reporting, parties who are able to curate and secure institutional knowledge and facilitate transitions between strategic plans for biodiversity, and MEA secretariats who can use the tool to identify information about implementation and also to access high quality national reports. As the tool is still very much in development, as the developers move into phase 3, there'll be a focus on how the DART can be integrated with other tools and some of the ones that we've been discussing in this webinar. So the developers will be in touch to consider how to move into that next phase. But really, next slide, please. But really what we wanted to talk about here in this section of the webinar is how might these tools fit within the current or perhaps the planned reporting and monitoring framework for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And this slide here is an illustration of how UNEP-WCMC is beginning to think about how the tools that we're working on, those existing and those still in development, might better support parties. So it isn't a fait accompli, it's very much our initial thinking around how the tools might be used. So for example, as you can see here, what we're thinking is that the platforms may fill a particular role across the different stages of planning, monitoring, reporting and implementation. Some of you may be familiar with Protected Planet, which has played a significant role in the monitoring and reporting around area-based targets and Aichi Target 11 of the former strategic plan for biodiversity. And as we've heard, UN Biodiversity Lab has a focus on planning and prioritization and implementation through spatial data and maps. And the target tracker, as we've heard, may have a focus around monitoring and reporting. So as we're considering this, we're thinking about how the tools might interoperate with each other and how they might fit within this landscape, but also across national, regional and global processes and scales. And what we're keen to do further to these webinars and as we develop the tools is to broaden this mapping of interoperability, to think about how we can enhance the connections between the tools and platforms that are being developed, and also to reduce duplication of effort and consistency between the data and reporting that is shown across the tools. We'd also like to make sure that as we're developing the tools, it's an iterative kind of dialogue between the developers and parties and the users of these tools to make sure that the data that's being displayed, particularly national data, can be displayed in a way that's useful to parties. Next slide, please. We recognise that there's been a lot of investment in these platforms and tools, and they're all designed with a specific role in mind. But what we want to do is maximise the available funding that has been put towards these tools to make sure that these tools are effective within the system, within the monitoring framework. And that's why we're running this series of webinars. And so our work on interoperability might look at the enhanced flows of data between the platforms, or how the tools might be used to support national and regional monitoring systems in their own right. So that's the idea of going forward with these tools. The ambition overall is to complement and better understand and map how the landscape of existing and emerging tools might better work to support post-2020 implementation. And we welcome views through this channel and through other channels on how we can work with parties to identify their needs and priorities and to show them as we develop these tools going forward. And finally, next slide, please. And finally, as we've been developing these tools, I think it's worth noting that they should sit alongside national capacity building efforts to help countries collect and manage data, which is obviously critical to the delivery of the biodiversity framework. And within this operability landscape, the global data are also a useful resource for supporting national reporting. So, for example, many of you are familiar, of course, with Protected Planet, which I've already mentioned, and of the World Database on Key Biodiversity Areas, both of which are data sets that are developed from national data sets, but are globally consistent and fulfill a global reporting mandate as well. And so we're interested in this sort of interplay between global and national data sets. In addition to that, of course, we know of data sets that are formed entirely from global data sets, and other data might come from remote sensing, which can provide a snapshot of environmental condition and change and can be a cost-effective way to complement national data collections. So in summary, we just want to think about how the tools might be better used in the process of and in the monitoring framework for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Thanks very much. Next slide. I think that was a thank you. And thanks, Andy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Natasha, for that presentation. And yes, I think as we've observed, there's a lot of synergies between the various initiatives, and we need to capitalise on that. I don't think I've actually got a question yet on this, but I have one question for you, which might be a bit unfair, but do you think that the sort of current discussions that we're having around the global biodiversity framework and review mechanisms in preparation for COP15 sort of adequately address these issues? I mean, are we close? Do you think that the parties in their decisions are giving enough direction to the organisations that are working on these various initiatives?
Thanks, Andy. That's a great question. I think, so from our perspective, I think we'd love to hear more from parties about what we're developing and how it can be used in the national and regional context, and in order for the tools that we're developing, which as I say, have had significant investment, can be maximised and used to support that process. So I think that there's probably some work still to be done around thinking about how these tools might fit and support the monitoring framework. And as the discussions go up onto COP15, we look forward to engaging in that dialogue to think about exactly that and talking to parties through that process. So as I say, this session and these webinars are a stepping stone towards that dialogue, and we hope to continue these as we go on the journey to COP15.
Okay, thank you very much, Natasha. And maybe there are other reflections that others would have that you can bring into the final summary discussion. So I'd now like to move on to our final presentation for today. This presentation is from Sarah Over from IUCN, and it's about contributions for the Nature platform. So over to you, Sarah.
Thanks very much, Andy. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. As Andy mentioned, I'm Sarah Over, and I'm the communications manager for the members at IUCN. And as such, I'm responsible not only for communications, but also engagement with members at a global level. So I've been involved in this latest initiative that was launched by our DG Bruno Overlay at the recently terminated IUCN Congress in Marseille last month. The reason that this platform came to life is that for more than a decade, IUCN has actually had a mandate to operate as a one programme across its members, national and regional committees, the IUCN commissions and the Secretariat. But to date, there has been no mechanism to allow IUCN's members to document what they plan to contribute towards the IUCN programme. And in the establishment of the new programme, Nature 2030, which was approved by the members earlier this year, we received the mandate to establish such a mechanism in the form of a digital platform, which is this Contributions for Nature. Next slide, please. So because both nature itself and the actions to conserve it vary so enormously around the surface of our planet, the programme Nature 30 established that this platform should be a spatial one, which would allow IUCN constituents for now, and hopefully in the future potentially other non-state actors, would allow them to document the actual places that they intend to implement conservation or restoration action over the coming decade. The idea is that these spatial data are then combined within the platform with existing global high-resolution metrics of the potential contributions towards global goals for nature represented by these places. So in phase one of the contributions platform, we have two such metrics. The first is the STAR metric, or the Species Threat Abatement and Restoration metric, which is derived from the IUCN Red List. And measures potential contributions towards global biodiversity goals, specifically for extinction risk reduction. The second metric that we're using is a metric of carbon sequestration potential, which is derived from the Restoration Barometer to measure potential contributions towards global climate change mitigation goals, specifically for nature-based solutions. And by extension, therefore, the platform should document potential contributions towards the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the Paris Agreement, SDGs 13 on climate and 15 life on land. Further down the line in phase 2, we are going to explore the incorporation of additional underlying data to allow documentation of potential contributions towards global goals for other dimensions of nature, such as freshwater and marine biodiversity and ecosystem services and so on. Next slide, please. So the platform will comprise 3 distinct but interrelated modules. There'll be the data entry module, the validation module, and the visualization module. We are currently testing the data entry module. You can see the login page here. It's a classic login page. You enter your IUCN information, and then you get taken through to the system itself. Next slide, please. As a bit of background, at the first stage of the development of the platform, we did consult with IUCN members to understand the needs and constraints that they face at a finer level than those that could be reflected in the program itself. We conducted this through a survey, which was circulated earlier in the year, back in March, and we got responses from around 100 of our members across all categories and all statutory regions. And from that, we got insights about the perceived benefits of documenting contributions, preferred format for data entry, and also associated data fields, which should be prioritised for inclusion at this stage. With these responses in hand, we then began the development of the platform itself. And here you can see, once you've logged in into the system, a user is taken to a screen which offers a range of different mechanisms for documenting spatial data about the place in question. And these methods reflect the diverse responses that we actually received on this subject through the questionnaire. So specifically, users can document spatial data by selecting either key biodiversity areas or protected areas in existing polygons. They have the possibility of drawing new polygons or adding buffered points, or finally of uploading GIS data. And once the spatial data has been entered, the user can then provide additional information relating to the contribution, such as what kinds of threats are being abated, the name of their contribution, the dates for which it's anticipated to run, things like that, the funding needed, and the number of male and female staff, and direct beneficiaries from the contribution. Once they've completed all the fields that they want to, it's submitted. Their contribution is submitted, and then we pass through to the validation module. Next slide, please. So we haven't actually started working on the validation module as yet. We are in discussions as to exactly how that, who and how that can work. But we do have wireframes for the third module, which is the visualization module, which will of course be the public interface of the platform. And as with the data entry module, the backbone of this visualization module will be maps for displaying the potential contributions, both individually and aggregate. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, in this third module, the potential contributions made by the places in question towards global goals will be, the goals aimed at reducing extinction risk will be documented by the STAR metric, and likewise the potential contributions towards global goals for climate change will be documented in terms of carbon sequestration. And it will be possible to filter or aggregate potential contributions in a range of ways. You can do it by country, by region, by IUCN membership category, constituent type, or by type of conservation or restoration action that is underway. And of course, the broadest level of aggregation will encompass all of the contributions that are documented, and therefore the overall aggregate potential contributions of IUCN as a union. And the idea of this is then that this could in turn be documented through to peer platforms, some of which we've seen here this morning, such as the Action Agenda platform or the NASCA platform for climate change. So next slide. That's it for now from me. Of course, happy to answer any questions. There's more information on the platform on the IUCN website, which is listed here. But of course, happy to take any other questions by email at a later date if needed. So thank you once again for the invitation. Back to you, Andy.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That looks a really interesting initiative. I've got one question for you, which is, you picked out two sort of goal areas around species status and carbon benefits. But I mean, do you consider sort of broadening the scope of that to address other specific targets or goals within the new post-2020 framework?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there is so much choice, isn't there? Of course, we chose these two because it is most directly linked to the work that we do. And obviously, we're not clear yet about what the global biodiversity framework will be. It's going to be agreed only next year, but we think at the moment that will probably it will contribute towards goal A and the species. But there's no, I mean, this is really just phase one. We're really hoping to expand this down the line to include other metrics as well. I mean, that is the plan.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah. I'm just checking whether if any other questions have been tabled. No, I don't think we have anything more specific at the moment. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sarah. And we'll move on now into our sort of wider discussions session, which is an interesting concept for this sort of webinar, where it's a bit one-sided insofar as the presenters get the chance to provide comments, and other people are sort of submitting their suggestions in text. So it's not an ideal interaction, but I think it's a great and efficient way of having some sort of dialogue. And we've got a number of questions which have come in around the various proposals. Thank you. We've now got the platform of the speakers up, and so please do feel free to add any further questions or comments, and please identify the particular speaker or platform that you're referring to, or do address some more cross-cutting issues to the various presenters here. And so I'll pick up first with a few questions for this is for Sarah Ivory. And so first of all, from Zeno, are there any reports to attest the efficiency of the approach on the ground, national and regional levels? Can you give us more insight onto what specificities relate to the data when it's disaggregated?
Andy, if I understand the question correctly, we haven't yet got any demonstration or reports around efficiency of this approach, as it is in itself. It is a proof of concept for tracking progress towards the post-2020 framework. We're still in the really early stages, and we're getting direction through user consultation and through the ongoing discussions in the run-up to COP15. We'll have a prototype ready for COP15, which will likely be focused on the global level, and we're going to use that as our opportunity to show users what we can do, and for them to then say to us, fantastic, or for them to say, actually we need this, and for us to then go back to the drawing board and improve our designs and plans. And exactly the interactions there between the national level, regional level, and global level, where things that we're still working out along as the monitoring framework evolves. In terms of the specifics of data disaggregation, and again, this is a question we're thinking about a lot. We're thinking about different scenarios as to how the final monitoring framework might look, and what that would mean for the type of data that target tracker would be ingesting and what it would be displaying. So it's not a question I can answer at the moment. There's a lot depends upon the data from which the indicators are built. So we're really waiting to see how the monitoring framework evolves particularly in the next couple of months, to understand exactly what segregated data might look like, and how the interaction between the national, regional, and global levels.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'll just follow up with another couple of questions, Sarah, if you don't mind. And these are from Joji. And hello, Joji. Can't see you. And as usual, Joji always asks difficult questions. So a couple from Joji, which are well, one is actually more of a comment, which is she'd like to suggest that the target tracker, besides showing national and global perspectives, should also show local perspectives, e.g. through community-based monitoring and information systems and other tools. And then the follow-up question to that is, can there be a role for community-based monitoring and information systems providing local level data to the target tracker? And I mean, whilst Joji's addressed that question to you, Sarah, I think we, once you've responded, I'll also invite the other presenters if they feel they could respond to that question insofar as it relates to their platforms.
Thanks, Andy. Thank you, Joji. Yeah, it's a really good question and a very important point. Again, for now, I can really only say it's something that we want to explore. I've already mentioned that we foresee technical and technological challenges to integrating different data from different sources and different levels. So of course, this is another step in that challenge, which I think it would add huge value if we can find a way to do that. As we get clearer on the monitoring framework, it will be a lot easier to understand how this might be incorporated. And so we'd love to talk to you, Joji, particularly as we get further along the line, to get your feedback and thoughts as to how this might work.
Thank you, Sarah. Does anybody else want to offer a response? So Mike's put his hand up, so over to you, Mike.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, these are tough questions. And I think a lot of what we've already talked about today inevitably is that sort of global versus national, and maybe we shouldn't say, or maybe I shouldn't say versus, but the technology and the approaches for visualizing data are pretty darn good, as you can see, some incredible platforms. I think the biggest challenge we have going forward is the data science. So what we're hearing, especially in sort of the discussions around the target tracker, is that we don't just want to track global progress, we want to track national progress, but don't just disaggregate global data, use my data. And that's easier said than done. And it does require a lot of forethought and some structuring around data standards and data reporting. And of course, it's great examples like FAO does this, the SDGs and others. But given the approach for biodiversity and the global framework, we have a lot of different sort of apples and oranges and bananas to deal with here. So I think it's a matter of sort of taking that top-down and bottom-up approach and using data standards and workflows and thinking ahead at how we can sort of meet in the middle. I think a lot of countries just don't have enough national data to report on progress. We may have to disaggregate global, but I think there's lots of opportunities to really work at the national scale and build up those data holdings and show the power of national data in that regard. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mike. And Sarah.
Yes, I mean, just building on what you said, Mike, absolutely. It's the quality of the data that does matter, but that's why what the approach we've also taken is to try and see it from both the top down and bottom up, which will allow for different levels of aggregation or disaggregation, depending on which way you want to look at it, to ensure that people can build nationally or at a wider level on a regional basis. But it is difficult when you have all these different platforms and you have different types of data. And this was one decision that we took. We asked our members which would be the best options for them, because also we are relying on people to have the data to input, and so it needs to be done. You need to have good data, and it needs to be easy. That's the other thing. It needs to be fairly simple for people to upload, because otherwise you're not going to get the data. So many challenges. Spatial. I personally like the spatial outlook, because I think you can get a snapshot view, but then if you've got the underlying data to dig down underneath, then of course it gives you more relevance.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so well, actually, I've got another couple of questions for Sarah Ivory. I think these are these could be very short questions for you. This is from Vienna and Han, and hi Vienna and Han. Nice not to see you, because I can't see you, but so Vienna asks, could you please reiterate where the tool is intended to be up and available for use? And Han asks, will the target tracker and the biodiversity, or this is target tracker and the Biodiversity Lab, be integrated into the National Clearinghouse Mechanism Bioland tool in the future, as is the case for DART and GBIF? So yeah, a couple of questions there which are a bit more specific.
Okay, so I'll start with the quick question from Vienna. So there will be a design-based prototype which will be ready for CBD COP, which will be something that can be, I guess, clicked around with, but will not have the full data underpinning it, and we'll use that really to get some feedback, to show what's possible, and then get that feedback as to what's really wanted based on that, and then we'll come back and we will start developing the full tool. We don't have a absolute date for when that will be available. Towards the end of next year would be the best guess at this stage. On Han's question regarding Bioland, that's a really good question. I can't answer for UN Biodiversity Labs, but certainly for Target Tracker, it's a discussion we need to have with specifically with the Bioland team, and to understand exactly what that integration might look like, and which way the data might flow, which will depend on the monitoring framework. I could see situations where data could flow from the Target Tracker in or from Bioland out, and that will depend on what the monitoring framework will eventually looks like and what the indicators, how the indicators are built. But hopefully, as this webinar is trying to make clear, what our overall intention is to ensure as much efficiency and complementarity between all these different tools, and as little redundancy or duplication as possible. So we're trying to have these conversations, and the different teams all work together from the early stages to make sure that this is the case.
Thank you, Sarah. I'd now like to move on to some more general questions that have come in just as we sort of move into the last phase of this discussion. So we've got a question here about let's see what people think of this one. Monitoring the post-2020 GBF may not be just limited to data collection and visualization. How can we have an overarching tool and mechanism that take advantage of the existing tools to build a more comprehensive one that will be used by all parties on an equal basis with respect to national priorities? And open that up for anyone who wants to respond to that question. How do we move from the complex landscape which you've very well described to us to something which is the one-stop shop for parties. And I think Natasha's going to take that one on.
I thought I'd have a stab at this, but I'm sure I'm not the only one who's going to give it a go. So I think, first of all, I think that the question, and I've seen another question from Marina in the chat as well, which is along the similar vein. We recognise, and I hope we've made this clear in this webinar series, that there are ever emerging landscape of tools and platforms, and that what we want to do is to try and streamline and maximise the use of the platforms and tools to in the landscape for reporting, monitoring and review. The question seems to have disappeared from my chat, so I'm hoping I'm going to answer it correctly. I think that it's not for us, the developers of the tool, to decide on what the maximum use is going to be, and if there's going to be one tool that suits all. It's true to say that the monitoring framework is still under discussion and negotiation, and what comes out of the next meetings in this intersessional period up to COP15 is going to be critical in helping us to understand what are the needs of parties. But what we're trying to do is to develop these tools that could hopefully work together. That's what's the whole point of the work that we're doing around interoperability, so that a user can use one sort of entry point to access information, but be accessing information from various sources and tools. That's the sort of ideal scenario in our minds at the moment. That's not to say that that's an appropriate way forward necessarily. It depends on our buy-in from the parties and whether or not parties are willing for us to share information and data in this way. But I think it's fair to say that it isn't our role to make that decision. It's for decision of the parties to decide on how the monitoring framework should work and what are the tools that parties are willing to use in the monitoring of the post-2020 framework. But yeah, others in the panel might have different views.
Does anyone else want to pick up on that? No takers. Well, Mike's going to have a go.
Not so much. I would just really support what Natasha said. It's of course not up to us, but I think there is no super tool, and so maybe what we need to do is just follow multiple lines of evidence. And I do realize just how confusing it is. If you're looking from the outside in at all these platforms, I don't know if we're always so great at explaining what they do and how they're different, but they all fill different niches. And I think that's the purpose of this webinar, is to try and explain that. Where the draft monitoring framework and the global biodiversity framework go is fundamental to us. I guess my plea is that when we think about the last decade, there's lots of reasons why we didn't meet the targets. Lack of national capacity, perhaps vaguely worded, unquantifiable targets, not many indicators identified early on. And this time around, we're, thanks to many different people pushing hard, especially in the CBD Secretariat, we're well better positioned. We've got the idea of headline indicators in the draft monitoring framework. But to me, we can't stop there. For this to really work, we need to have some structured reporting systems around those headline indicators, so we can sort of scale up and scale down data in a reasonable way and a credible way.
Thank you, Mike. I'll move on to another question that we've had, which is sort of you partly referred to there, Mike, which is about the capacity. And Lige has asked about thoughts and plans for capacity building to use these tools, and Yingzhu Abdullah has asked, are training courses being held on these tools and programs? And I think the more general issue there is what will be the constraints to the use of these tools by all parties in relation to capacity building, and how are in each of your cases are you sort of facilitating that capacity building? With perhaps some examples will be. So anyone want to pick up on that? Nobody volunteering to respond. I think, yeah, Sarah is going to have a go.
So just to speak for the target tracker, of course, as it's in the early stages, training isn't something we can do as yet, but it's absolutely something we intend, and the nature of that training is also going to depend on the functionalities that are built into a target tracker. So if there is a need for a functionality to upload national data, we need to not just train, it's not just about training on the, clicking the right buttons, but it's also about having that data in the right format, in a way that is going to then be meaningful once it's uploaded. So it's going to be a part of the development. Hand in hand with the development of the actual target tracker will be the development of training materials and webinars, workshops, whatever it takes to get parties in a position to use it.
Thank you, Sarah. And Natasha.
Well, I just wanted to highlight that I think many of us aren't responding because Mike and Lauren, perhaps others have responded in the chat and highlighted some of the available capacity building programs that the NatureServe is working on, and also UN Biolabs is providing. Also, just wanted to highlight that the DART tool, UNEP is providing national webinars and workshops to train stakeholders on using the DART. And in particular in Cameroon, they've highlighted some work that they're doing on capacity building there. I think just in a general note, though, that we're taking on board the need to build this into the development process of building the tools. And of course, we're not just going to develop the tools and expect them to be used, but they're all going to come with a capacity building program. And where that fits into the monitoring framework is still yet to be decided. But definitely in the development of the indicators and in the understanding of the indicators and in the use of the tools, there's definitely a lot of work still to be done.
Okay, thank you for all of that. I mean, I think I'll just bring things to a close now. I think we've had a very an awful lot of material been presented to us in a very short period of time, and talking about capacity building, I think my capacity has been exceeded in this short session, but it does demonstrate the importance and value of these sorts of opportunities to see the work that's being going on and to consider how it relates to the discussions that are underway on the Global Biodiversity Framework. It's I would encourage all the organizations here to sort of continue to sort of provide that sort of outreach and support, so that I think all those from my side involved in the negotiations in this virtual reality really miss the opportunities that we usually have for side events and other processes where you can learn an awful lot about these different initiatives, and it's a bit more difficult to do that in a virtual setting and get as much out of it. But I really much welcome the efforts that you've made to do that and bring this material to all the 155 participants we have on this call at the moment. So I'd just like to finish by thanking all of the presenters, all the organisations behind this meeting, the CBD Secretariat, UNEP-WCMC, and all the others who've helped. And thank all the presenters for their very sort of concise and presentations, but really sort of picked out the key messages. And I'd like to thank all the participants for joining this session. It will be repeated in French, Spanish, again in English. So I guess you've got another opportunity to have this discussion if you like. And thank you very much for giving us your time and your thoughts today, and best wishes. And looking forward to seeing many of you in face-to-face in the near future. So best wishes and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, what happens now? Do we just come off?